ทุกอย่างจนจบนะครับก็
So this session actually during the panelist is presenting as this, by design that you can raise up your hand and interrupt them, and if you can throw the challenging question to the panelists if you like, and please go to the microphone and ask your pressing questions right now. So it will be more or less the interactive, and you can ask them. Okay. For your headsets, you just select the channel A for English and channel B for Thai language.
Testing, can you hear us? Thank you. This is in English for the English channel. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, please. Thanks, Paul.
All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I will. I'm not going to go over everything I said because I think it was summarized already. But I do just want to point out that there's one document in particular that I think you would get a lot of benefit from if you would read, if you're curious about the internet architecture and how it works. So going to internetsociety.org, this tab here that says the internet, and then the tab, the heading that what is the internet? If you click that, I'm going to see if I can bring it up here real quick. There's a document, it's called A Brief History of the Internet, that was actually written by the key individuals that created the internet. And a lot of the things that I'm going to tell you are much better described in that document, but I'm just going to give an attempt at describing the high-level principles of the internet that were developed in the very early days, which was back in the 1960s. The early 60s is when some of the key concepts were created by some very smart engineers that realized that the then existing model for networking, which was called circuit switching, was very inefficient for communications with computers. So they came up with the concept of packet switching, which means that you do not have to have a physical reserved connection between 2 points to have communication. Instead, you take your communications, you break it up into packets, into small bits and pieces. You put headers on it so you can send it through a network, and it gets routed through maybe different paths across the network, but in the end, all of those different packets come together at the destination and you have communication. So it's a method that actually is very efficient for computer networking and is very resilient. So that's a key principle of how the internet works, is packet switching. So you might want to focus on that if you're going to do some more research. Another key principle that was developed was open architecture networking. And what that essentially means is that you could take disparate systems, different technologies of different types of computers that speak different languages, put them on a single network or on the internet, and they would be able to communicate. And that was very important because what they were trying to accomplish was to take specialized computers, maybe at one university, and connect them with other specialized computers at another university, and possibly connect those to some other research centers. And these were all different types of computers at that time, large computers that didn't speak the same language, so they had a need for internetworking, and that's where the internet comes from, is the concept of this open architecture. You could put all of the computers on the internet and they would be able to speak the same language. So that language was a communications protocol, and that is what's referred to widely today as TCP/IP. That is Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol. And they both have a slightly different purpose in the communications system of the Internet. Internet Protocol is a best efforts protocol of communication, such that from a sender, you send the messages, you send the packets across the network on a best efforts basis. Internet Protocol has the information on the headers of these packets so that it can be routed through the system, through the network, across global networks, through various gateways and router devices that only look at that header to determine where's the next hop for that particular packet to get closer to its destination. And that is the key function of the Internet Protocol, is making sure that you can send a packet from the source to the destination. And while I'm talking about the Internet Protocol, I should also mention that there's an important part of that that is the Internet address. So your IP address is what defines your host computer and the network. So initially there was an IP address that was 32 bits long. And if you read this document about the history of the Internet, Vint Cerf, I believe, is the author of that, and he is describing how at that time they were really only trying to connect these large research centers. So they thought that if you took this 32 bits and you only used the first 8 bits to define the network, and you had used the other 24 to define the computer, that was going to be more than you could ever dream of using at the time. Well, as it turns out, today we realize that that's not nearly enough, because of course over the history local area networks developed, and all these mobile devices that are now on the network, and pretty much everything is on the network today. We need many, many more addresses. So there's a new version of the Internet Protocol. It's called IPv6. The old one is referred to as IPv4. That's a topic that you're going to want to look into more, because we're actively moving to IPv6, and it's kind of a key transition for the Internet that we must accomplish. So please do some more research on that. So I talked about Internet Protocol. The other part of it is Transmission Control Protocol. And what that does is make sure that you can have reliable communications between your sender and your receiver of these communications. So it has error correcting functions there. It makes sure that you get acknowledges back and forth, and that you resend packets if necessary, because as you recall, the Internet Protocol is a best efforts protocol. So together, TCP and IP are really what makes the Internet work even today, and key piece of the Internet architecture. There's also another protocol that you might hear of, so I want to mention it. It's called UDP, that's User Datagram Protocol. That's for those communications that don't need all of the overhead of the Transmission Control Protocol. So it's a lighter weight protocol that's used for some streaming of media, for example, where you really don't have the time to do all of the acknowledgments, and you don't want the overhead of having to do all that extra processing, because if you're live streaming media and you miss some of those packets, you really don't want to go back and get them, because the moment's gone. So you just have to keep going, and you just hop over those and jump to the next segment. So that's why you want another protocol like User Datagram Protocol. So there's a number of organizations today, and it's commonly referred to as the Internet ecosystem, at least that's how we discuss it in the Internet Society, that contribute to the ongoing development of the Internet. So I think I've kind of covered a couple of the key principles of how the Internet works, and now I just want to mention who is involved in making it work. And going back to the web page here, I want to show you one more document. If you go to publications, go back over here to the Internet and who makes it work, there's a link here called Internet Ecosystem. And if you follow that, it has a really interesting diagram of our attempt at identifying some of the key people, groups, organizations that make the internet work. And whenever you hear someone from the Internet Society talking about how the internet works or how policy should be made on the internet, we always refer to it as a multi-stakeholder process. And when we say that, this is kind of the document, this is the model that's in our minds, is that there's all of these stakeholders that have serious concerns about how the internet works. They want to make sure it continues to work well, so we need to include them all when we have those discussions. But I want to just jump over and show you and zoom in a little bit, and I'll read these to you because I'm afraid it's not that clear. The top is naming and addressing with freely accessible processes for policy development. So earlier I mentioned one of the key aspects of the internet architecture was the addressing, the IP address. Well, there's organizations around the world that play an important role in making sure that IP addresses get assigned, and those are called regional internet registries. They work in conjunction with some other groups listed here to make sure that internet service providers and anyone running a network around the world has addresses so that they can assign those to the computers that they have and make them accessible on the internet. So there's also, aside from the internet addresses, there's the domain name system. Now, I'm not going to go into that in detail because I think my colleagues are going to talk about it a little bit more, but it's listed here, ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. So that is the organization that works on domain names. Like if you were going to talk about www.internetsociety.org, that's the domain name. Another key part of how the internet works and something that you'll want to look into more. So as you're thinking about how the internet works, another area where you're going to want to focus is this section here that says Open Standards Development. And that brief history of the internet document describes how in the early days there were different task forces that had various responsibilities for determining how the internet architecture was working and how it was evolving. Well, today, this is what those have evolved into in general in kind of this area. And you look at the bottom branch here, it says Internet Society Affiliated Organizations. And there's IETF, IAB, and I can't actually read that one. IRTF. So the Internet Engineering Task Force, the Internet Architecture Board, and the Internet Research Task Force are the three organizations listed there. All of those groups today play a key role in determining how the internet's working, how the protocols are designed, what new protocols are developed. So another area to focus in on. I'd love to be able to tell you in great detail how the internet works and go through all of these topics in much more detail, but to be honest, it's just a lot of information to cover, and the best I can do here is refer you to these organizations and refer you to the documents on the Internet Society website, because there's just a wealth of very well developed materials there, summary materials that will do such a much better job, and I don't have time to do it here today. So with that introduction and overview, I'd like to pass on to the next speaker. How do we go to the presentation? Yeah. Oh.
หมดช่วงนี้แล้วมีใครมีคำถามอะไรไหมครับเรื่อง
Anybody got any questions at this point? You heard about the background, the underlying internet working of the system from its history. And do you have any question? We'll ask the next speaker, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So I am really happy, actually, that TIP asked me to be on this panel because it allows me to wear my previous hat, which is the academic hat, and go back to talking about some issues on the internet. So I think I've chosen a quite unfortunate title because I don't think we have the time to unravel all the legal and policy issues of the internet, but I am going to try, and please do interrupt me when I speak fast, when you don't understand or you want to ask a question, so we can go back and reflect. So, following from what Paul was saying, I would just very briefly like to mention what he was referring to when he was talking about the internet, how it works, and the open nature of the internet. So I think it was two years ago or last year, the organizations that Paul mentioned, so that is the Internet Society, the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, the Internet Engineering Task Force, that's the ITF, the Internet Architecture Board, as well as the IEEE, which is the Internet Engineering, Electrical Engineering, yes, came up, thank you, came up with what we mean by Internet Open Standards. And they came up with these very 5 basic principles that, as you can see, they're not, it's not anything impressive, but their significance is very, very important. Their significance is huge. So first of all, cooperation. In order to create what we call the internet and also the technologies and platforms that are based on this, you need the cooperation of various actors. Secondly, these people said that in order to innovate, in order to be able and continue to have the internet the way we have it, we need to adhere to issues of due process, broad consensus, transparency, balance, and openness. Thirdly, collective empowerment. All of us together to try to achieve something. Availability, and actually one of the most important aspects is voluntary adoption. Those standards were never officially imposed. They never had to go through an intergovernmental organization. They never had to be subjected to extended negotiations, and we all know that treaty and intergovernmental organizations have the tendency of prolonging the processes and taking too much time. So essentially the internet is where it is today, and we're enjoying the benefits, each one of us in a very, very different way, but all of us collectively, the internet as a huge tool of communication, of trade, of commerce, of information, of the way we see it because of these standards. So I would like to give you a very, very brief history of some policy and governance aspects of the internet. The internet started as a military experiment. It started as a military experiment between the United States and Russia during the years of the Cold War. As soon as that was over, suddenly the United States found itself in the possession of a great tool. Not everybody was able to understand at the time that it was a great tool, but thankfully there were some people that were able to communicate that we have something that we need to try and figure out how we can use it. So some people started thinking what we can do, how can we take it out of the military and put it into a much wider context. The first step, of course, was the funding that was coming for all internet research to move away from the US Department of Defense and into the US Department of Commerce, which signaled, if you want, the first indication of the United States at the time to create something for wider circulation, if you want. So I'm not going to go again, I'm not going to give you all the details, but due to international pressure, due to various other political and social reasons, the Clinton administration in 1997 decided to lead the internet to its privatization. And back then, we didn't really know what the internet was. We hadn't really figured out what the internet was. So essentially, when the United States government said we lead the internet to privatization, it was referring to the privatization of the domain name system. Very briefly, domain names are the web addresses that allow you and me and everybody else to access the internet. Paul mentioned IP addresses. Essentially, they are the same. The founders of the domain name system again had the vision to say that users cannot remember a set of numbers, so instead let's replace numbers with names. So right now your Facebook.com, your Twitter.com, your Hotmail's account, your Google, everything is essentially a set of numbers that is reflected in your screen as a set of letters which allow you to remember. So in 1998, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is the international organization that manages the technical aspects of the domain name system, was created. The domain name system was set by a visionary and extremely intelligent person called John
Sorry,
Postel.
Konstantinos, quickly slow down a little bit. Thanks.
See? Okay, so thank you. So yes, the domain name system was created by someone called John Postel, who was working for the University of California under grant, and he created these two strings of domain names, the generic top-level domain names, which is your .com, .net, .info, .org, etc., and the country code top-level domain names, which is .th for Thailand, .uk for the United Kingdom, and they represent essentially the countries. So the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers has existed since 1998. It is one, alongside actually the Internet Society and the Internet Engineering Task Force, it is one of the first efforts to institutionalize some aspects of the Internet. The remit of ICANN, the abbreviated version of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, is purely on domain names. It's limited on domain names, nothing more. ICANN is a body that works under a multi-stakeholder framework. That means that its policy considerations are conducted by various actors representing different interests, and this also reflects, this multi-stakeholder framework reflects the governance structures that have been put in place for this wider internet governance sphere, as we call it, which leads us to 2003. So even though ICANN really precedes the World Summit on Information Society, its first phase was in Geneva in 2003, and the second phase was in Tunis in 2005, the multi-stakeholder model existed long before those two summits. We didn't call it necessarily multi-stakeholder model, but there was a very clear understanding that because the internet has so many aspects, and because the internet is this huge network that involves so many different, that has so many different angles, we need the participation of as many actors as we can in order to be able and understand how it works. Therefore, the policies that we decide to implement need to reflect this very clear understanding and knowledge. So, in 2003, the governments of the world gathered in Geneva to talk about information society. It wasn't necessarily about the internet, it wasn't necessarily about the governance of the internet. However, they soon realized that they cannot talk about ICT technologies unless they have resolved a very basic question: how to govern the internet. The negotiations were tedious, they were long, and they agreed that because this issue is so very important, they need 2 years in between to go back to the respective countries, reflect on it, consult their various constituencies, and meet in 2005 in Tunis in order to be able and consider those issues that were left, if you want, unanswered during the Geneva phase in 2003. So in Tunisia, something very significant happened. the governments of the world opened up their tables and they offered seats to various actors. Civil society, businesses, and the technical community were represented in Tunisia. I was there. I was a PhD student at the time, and it was really, really fascinating because everybody knew that something is going to happen. We didn't really know what it was, but we knew that something great was about to happen, and something great did happen. The working definition of internet governance says that internet governance is going to be conducted under a multi-stakeholder framework, which means with the participation of governments, civil society, the technical community, businesses, all on an equal footing. And it is the first time that we see such a governance structure being applauded in a summit that was hosted, better yet, by an intergovernmental organization. That was the International Telecommunications Union. Now, the ITU does not own WSIS. It provided the platform for WSIS, but it was a great step towards continuing discussions in that forum. And if we move, so out of the Tunis, the second great thing that came out of it was the Internet Governance Forum. That is the IGF, which will be hosted later this year in Bali. The great thing about the IGF is the fact that it is a platform where everybody, it is open to all of you, it is open to everybody. You don't need to be affiliated with anyone specifically. If you're affiliated, that's okay. But if you're an individual and you want to hear what's happening on the internet, to hear the issues that are currently discussed, to hear the issues that various governments, businesses, and civil society groups are facing, I would strongly recommend that you attend, if you can, at least one IGF. The IGF has no decision-making power, so basically it is a place where you discuss, so governments and all the actors attended without having the stress of having to reach decisions, which is a great benefit, especially in an international environment like the internet. And also, it has given the excuse, if you want, for various discussions to start happening locally and regionally. So after the Global Internet Governance Forum, we have seen regional Internet Governance Forum emerging. We have seen local Internet Governance Forum emerging. And it's not just the IGF. It is the fact that these discussions have been taken everywhere. So in Africa, Asia, Europe, the United States, Latin America, Central America, all parts of the world right now, most at least parts of the world right now, are discussing about internet governance issues. So this multi-stakeholder, where are we now? In 2013, I can tell you that the multi-stakeholder governance model that came out of all this, from ICANN and WSIS and the IGF, is the model that is being promoted as the standard practice for internet governance discussions. It is not a solution to everything, but it's a great first step towards achieving better policy considerations. The interesting thing is that nobody really can tell you what multi-stakeholder governance is. Each organization is trying to find its foot on it. They're trying to find how they can adapt it to their own practices. But slowly and progressively and consistently, we have seen the model being adopted even within intergovernmental organizations. So the World Intellectual Property Organization, for example, which is the United Nations body, historically an intergovernmental organization dealing with intellectual property, is starting to figure out how it can adopt multi-stakeholder processes. The same is happening at the level of the ITU. As I said, different organizations, different understandings, different approaches, but we are now consciously discussing this. So, just very briefly to finish, when we're talking about internet governance, a huge part of it, it's not just this part, but a huge proportion of it has to do with legal issues. And I am a lawyer by education, and unfortunately, those legal issues are getting the best part of me, so they're always part of my discussions. And the main issue with the internet and law is regulation and jurisdiction. As you know, the Westphalia Treaty basically determined that each nation can do whatever it wants within its borders. Suddenly the internet appears and we have this international medium that we need to regulate somehow, because we cannot leave it out unregulated. It will lead to an anarchy that we really don't want at this stage. So the question becomes, which law? International law is not the appropriate forum, because international law takes approximately 12 to 15 years to be negotiated and ratified. In internet years, 15 years is like 100 years, because technology always moves faster than law. So the first problem that we're facing is that of jurisdiction. Which law should prevail and why, if at all? And that is the more general issue. So under that, we have all the issues concerning intellectual property and digital content. We have issues with copyright, trademarks, and local content that are all very significant. I am sure that a lot of you are part of, and you're reading all the time, the discussions that are happening in the copyright front. Similar discussions are happening in the trademark front. There are issues of privacy. And now that we've moved into this, the understanding of the internet as a social medium, so basically we have Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus and all the other social media, privacy is becoming more and more important. How can you protect the user's privacy? Do these big platforms respect users' privacy? We have issues of security. Those are becoming more and more important because everything now is conducted on the internet. A lot of infrastructure that used to be independent of the internet has moved on the internet. Water, electricity, the railway. In Paris, for example, the metro works, it doesn't have a driver. It's all done through the internet. So there are a lot of security concerns that governments are facing, and security has become a huge issue. Human rights, again, different understandings, but because the internet essentially allows this flow of information, and it does so very organically and naturally, human rights has become an issue. Access has become an issue. The UN rapporteur for the United Nations, Mr. Frank LaRue, has actually recommended that access should be elevated to a human right. And finally, we have e-commerce. That's electronic commerce and all these issues, all the issues that follow electronic commerce. But the internet is also a commercial medium. So there are a lot of commercial activities happening. How many of you have used Amazon? How many of you have actually shopped online? I don't think I am going to the shops anymore. I am doing everything online. So you again there have various issues concerning jurisdiction and the choice of law. I'm going to stop there because I think you're already tired, and I'm going to pass it to Pindar to continue. I think it's Pindar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I
anything like at the moment please มีคำถามช่วงนี้ไหมครับถ้าอยากจะถามไปที่ไมค์ได้เลยนะครับมีไหมครับเชิญครับเชิญเลยครับอย่าจะ
If there are any questions, please proceed to the microphone.
what you want Thai is okay as well
เขาว่าแบบสมมติว่าเรามีเว็บไซต์เอารูปจากอเมริกามาแปะไว้ในเว็บแล้วก็มี
So my question is, if I got my
มีเว็บของอเมริกามา
I got my website in Thai, but actually I copy a photo from a website in the States, and I put it up on my Thai website. Okay.
pictures photos like that of any like Thai website to like display it on like local here Thai website. Does it like any like legal issues, or does there any like international like law or framework to handle that?
Sure, that's a great question. I'll actually address that in my presentation, and there's an aspect to do with copyright, which I will get to if we can find my presentation.
Okay. ครับเดี๋ยวเขาจะพูดถึงเรื่องนี้พอดีนะครับในการพรีเซนต์ของเขาครับ
Do you know whether
แต่ว่าเดี๋ยวตอนนี้รอสักครู่นะครับเหมือนจะมีปัญหานิดหน่อยเทคนิคตรงนี้ครับระหว่างนี้ผมอาจจะสรุปคร่าวๆนะครับก็ช่วงแรกเนี่ยพอลนะครับก็พูดถึงเรื่องว่าโอเคอินเทอร์เน็ตนะครับคล้ายๆว่าเหมือนเรามีเมืองอยู่เนี่ยครับมันจะต้องถ้าจะไปส่งของอะไรต่างๆเนี่ยในเมืองเนี่ยมันก็ต้องตัดถนนทีนี้ถนนเนี่ยมันก็ต้องมีมาตรฐานนะครับไม่ใช่ว่าคนนึงอยากจะวิ่งเลนซ้ายคนอยากจะวิ่งเลนขวามันก็จะชนกันนะครับก็ต้องมีการกำหนดมาตรฐานต่างๆหรือว่าจะไปส่งของที่บ้านแต่ละบ้านได้เนี่ยมันก็ต้องมีเป็นที่อยู่ไปรษณีย์อะไรต่างๆนะครับแล้วก็พูดเปรียบเทียบเรื่องของการเนี่ยนะช่วงแรกที่ผมคิดว่าสำคัญเหมือนกันก็คือเรื่องที่บอกว่าเมื่อก่อนเนี่ยเวลา
He is just summarizing what was presented. Okay.
Well, just my thanks to the translators. They're doing an excellent job. As my presentation is coming online, perhaps I give a personal background. So 10 years ago, I was elected to the Board of Trustees of the Internet Society with Steve Crocker. And as you know, he was here until yesterday evening, and he is the current chairman of the Internet ICANN Board of Directors, this group that administers the domain name system. So, then that's my second presentation.
We don't have it's not here.
Okay. It's no problem. I probably won't use the presentation then. Yeah. Or maybe just connect my machine to it, if possible. Yeah. Sorry, I had two presentations. I was speaking 3 times today. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make the third one. What I'd like to do is share with you some perspectives gathered over 20 years. 20 years ago, I started the first ISP in Hong Kong in 1993. So I originally, unlike a lawyer here, I was an engineer. And by historical accident, I see myself as an internet volunteer. And that's a very important theme that I want to talk about, because this session is about my internet. In that sense, it's your internet. And so one of the things I would like to do is just mirror some of my personal experiences over the last 20 years with how the internet has developed. So way back when, I helped the internet commercially deploy in Hong Kong. And over that point in time, we needed certain infrastructures to reflect local policy. So what I would like to do is share with you an Asia-Pacific view of how the internet got developed, with really a view for the commercial activities going forward over the next 10 years. So it's actually forward-looking. Thank you. Right, so the theme of the conference, thank you, is the internet, the power to create. So what I would like to do in this workshop is focus on, well, how do you actually create that power for your internet? Again, one of the themes is personal empowerment, because again, this open system allows anyone to participate. As it's a workshop, I just want to get some interaction going, I guess. How many of you play football? Okay, so no football stars. I thought this was Thailand. Everyone loves football in Thailand. Do you know what the real power of football is? A ball, yes. It's a global game. It's a game that everyone plays all over the world. So that was the easy question. Okay, so there's one of 3. Let's just get going. So again, the power. What's the real power of the internet? If you can think about, that's probably a little bit more harder. And last but not least is probably a real substantive one, which is how do you keep developed economies growing in a sustainable fashion within resource limits? As you know, economies which are well developed, or developed economies such as the United States and Europe, etc., are facing issues to do with growth. So the internet's already there. How do we keep those kinds of economies growing, as well as those people or those economies who have yet to connect or are at the very early stages of getting connected? So the way I see it is that, if you excuse me, I'll just sit down here. The power of the internet, well, as we heard before the internet was the phone system. And what the phone system did was very unique, in that it extended your ears and your voice anywhere in the globe. Okay? When we deployed the internet, this is in fact in some sense before the web, we saw that the internet was something different, because it actually extended your eyes, your primary sensorial mechanism, together with your mind in terms of thoughts and ideas. And what we really did was we found that, well, once you share ideas, you can share so-called good ideas and also share bad ideas. The situation right now is changing because we're not only just sharing voice and video, we're actually now moving on to tangible things. We're in fact, in some theoretical sense, sharing our hands. For example, the new technologies dealing with additive manufacturing or 3D printers as it's more commonly known. Now, what I think we've basically learned is that when you have this global dialogue where everyone can participate, everyone has a microphone, the real question is who's actually going to listen to you, okay, when everyone's speaking at the same time. And this basic internet technology has shown us and act as really like a social mirror. It's like looking in the mirror in the morning, you know, and you see the good, you see the bad. It's not really, it's a technology in a sense, but it reflects both the good and bad. Now, one key word you've heard this morning is open. So why is open important? Well, it allows anyone to participate, and that enables innovation to occur without anyone sort of blocking you. And I'll move on to the example. Blank slide. The way I see the internet, however, is that the main purpose or the main benefit of the internet is to allow information to be shared. Okay, shared anywhere in the world. But why do we share? Right? What's the purpose of sharing? What's the benefit of sharing? Now, as a parent, that's one of the first things you teach your children is, well, if you have more than one children as well, you've got to share, learn to get along with others, please, fight over scarce resources. As a child, at least in Hong Kong, it's one of the first things you learn is please share. Again, because if there's within resource constraints, then if you don't share, if you don't make efficient use of this resource, then what tends to happen historically is that you fight. You get any two kids, one toy, you'll know what happens next. So sharing in some sense, or sharing in terms of a commercial sense, which we would call trade, okay, is in some sense a way to avoid conflict. Please keep that in the back of your mind. Now let's look at the problem with sharing is, the earlier question is that if you start sharing someone else's work, a photo from a website, etc., in some sense that is someone's intellectual property. So the analogy here is, I guess, in the previous industrial revolution, the chief resource was oil. Okay. Now in the information revolution, when we're sharing information, the things that the information that flows through the fiber optic pipes or over the airways actually belongs to somebody. Someone went through the effort and energy to create it. Now what we saw is that in the late 90s, when we had this explosion of people sharing. They were sharing everything. They were sharing music and videos, etc. But unfortunately, they were sharing stuff that may not necessarily they had access to in terms of the legal perspective, okay? So they were sharing stuff instead of purchasing it because there were mechanisms not to be able to buy it. They were sampling before purchasing, or they were sharing information which was, they weren't actually authorized to share. And to share information which was in the public domain was not actually, they couldn't really be identified. So one of the key innovations beyond the internet in the last 10 years was a way to legally share information. And by legally sharing information, I must go through a little bit of legal stuff, which is when you are the author and you create a work, if in some jurisdictions you have to have, there's an imaginative step, but basically you own the rights of how copies are made of that work. So that's known as copyright. Now the default of copyright once you create that work is that you retain as author all of the rights. Okay? So unless and until someone has asked you and granted permissions to use that copyright right, the person who wants to use it doesn't have that right. So when the internet came along and we're sharing stuff, the problem was twofold. The internet didn't have an inbuilt identity system, right? The old phrase was on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Okay. Now you can see that everything on the internet is actually a dog. But the point here is that there's some friction. In other words, for me to share that news article in the United States or what have you, I would have to go through the overhead or some first step of asking permission to reproduce, to make that copy, or to make an adaptation, for example, if I want to do translation work. So one of the key innovations in the last 10 years is open licensing standards in this area of copyright, and there are principally two. One which is called Creative Commons, which basically does everything other than software. Another one called the GPL version 3, which for those of you who write software was basically used in the open source movement. So CC now, as at the end of December last year, was 10 years old. There are now over 500 million licensed works on the internet available under the CC license. And as far as Hong Kong, we were relatively late to the party. In 2004, CC was adopted by Taiwan. Again, this is looking at language groups or Chinese language content. And in mainland China, it was March 2006. And I helped together with other volunteers, to introduce it to Hong Kong in 2008. The other extreme from all rights reserved is no rights reserved. In other words, you let anyone use it, and that's in the public domain. Copyright has, in theory, it varies by jurisdiction, but since basically the death of the author, you've got 50 years before it falls over into the public domain. The legal aspects of Creative Commons, or the benefit of that, is actually not really the main benefit. The main benefit is actually very hidden, and that is that these licenses and the works are machine readable. In other words, they can be found by the search engines. So on the internet today, if you can't find it, in some sense it doesn't exist. So the technical aspect to do with why CC licenses are useful is really doing with search. So CC strikes a middle ground between one extreme of having all rights reserved, you don't have permission unless you ask me. The other one is I have no rights and it's all free-for-all. So CC enables the author, there's 6 different licenses in order to pick and choose how they want other people to license their works. So for example, in education, you may want to license your lecture notes out to other people in the Thai education community, as long as they don't make money from it. So in some sense, you want to retain the right to you yourself to make money from your efforts, but you don't want others to be able to exploit your work in a commercial sense. So there's 6 different licenses. Again, the key innovation was the license themselves, but also the aspect to do with the fact that they're machine readable and searchable. And at the end of here, at the bottom of the slide, there's a strategic plan which was published a few days ago. I would encourage you to read it. This presentation, I hope, will be on the internet, the PDF version, because everything I've said there's hypertext links for references. So in CC Hong Kong, again, we managed the expectations in 2007, dealing with the legal community. We released it in 2008, and the main area that we focused on was really looking at content, educational content, open education resources, and access to our cultural history. So right now, since 2011, we have about 500,000 licensed works. This is 2011. Keeping track of it is interesting, but it kind of misses the point. Now, when you talk about these developments, just the openness in terms of the technical development, you can look at the whole internet system as a development, but the reason why we call it My Internet is that you actually can participate and make a decision about how you want your internet to develop wherever you are, for example, in Thailand. And so the ISOC has developed an internet development scenario building. This is the basic framework, and you have, in some sense, 2 dimensions to make a choice. You want to maintain tight control, so-called on the far left, command and control, or on the right-hand side, you have a very decentralized approach, which was in some sense where it began. Very open, very homogeneous, everyone was researchers, etc. And now we're swinging from one end of the pendulum to the other, and on the vertical axis, you look at the generative and or reductive. So I would highly encourage you to read that paper on the website. Now, in terms of internet evolution pathways, the key finesse was really not the fact that it does evolve. In fact, one of the things that is very overwhelming for policymakers is the rate of innovation, the rate of change. I think one thing was mentioned earlier that 15 years is like 100 internet years, and that's not too far off the mark. We typically work at the internet year being about 3 months long in terms of technology cycles. If you look at the mobile internet industry, that's kind of where things are. The 2 aspects that typically you focus on when you get involved with the internet, one of which is access. I think there was a talk point about how do you get access to the internet? Is it a human right now to get access to the internet? And that kind of involves the hardware issues or the infrastructural issues. Do you have access to broadband over wireline or fixed line or fiber, what have you? And that traditionally has gotten a lot of attention by policymakers. But there's another thing that I actually think is actually more important than the hardware, because the hardware is very interesting. In the technical design of the internet infrastructure, it didn't care about the hardware. Okay? The fact that the internet has managed to evolve over wireless, over fiber, over copper, what have you, is because it didn't care. It was a logical layer in some sense above that. And so, again, as the hardware changes, the way you access the internet will change. But the software infrastructure is one of the themes that I think in the last day that I've heard here, and also the Gala reception, that needs, I think, a lot of attention. And that really is your key resource, which is your people. Again, the stuff that flows through these pipes is someone's intellectual property. So people generate that. And so in terms of how one interfaces your education system with the internet, how do you manage so-called the good and the bad, and how do you develop your creative industries? And I understand Thailand has an excellent creative industry. If you just look at, for example, the advertising industry, or look all around you, it's lovely to see. So here, in terms of commerce, or where does the rubber meet the road? Well, electronic commerce was mentioned earlier. How do you compete when small companies can now, over the internet, access global markets? Well, several points. What is now commercially optimal size has changed. Before you had to be a multinational company. Right now you can have 8 or 10 people who have access to the internet and you can sell to the whole world. So in several economies they're looking at really changing the nature of competition to compete through creativity. If someone is going to steal your intellectual property or not license it, because that's always their option, right? I say, well, I'll just take it. They won't know who I am, or we'll just use it and adapt it. Then how does a person who originally created that protect themselves? There are legal means, and you can try and find them, again, somewhere on the planet. You have to track that person down. Again, you've got a problem with jurisdiction, okay, which you've heard. Are you going to enforce your rights? Some people are actually not even bothering. They're saying, look, I'm going to compete by being continuously creative. Because who wants 2G phones or 1G phones? I mean, who wants to compete with old technology? Who wants to compete with old ideas? So the question is, what's the soft infrastructure that you can very quickly and productively generate money, in some sense, through your individual economy's creative capacity? And I'll be talking about Hong Kong's example in just a moment. So how do you compete through creativity? Well, let's look at an innovation which will have got a lot of people's attention, which was Apple iTunes. Was that a technical innovation? I don't actually think that. I think it was a business model innovation. But could you imagine iTunes for ideas, a marketplace where it's very easy for you to legally license someone else's IP at the click of a button, 99 cents for an idea, whatever, okay? In other words, are there commercial ways that you can buy someone's IP without having to rip them off, steal it, or what have you? I believe there is. And so when I talk about internet economies, I talk about an IP sandwich. There's internet protocol at the bottom layer. You've got the meat, which is a creativity of your people in the middle layer, and at the top is intellectual property in terms of protection. So one of the things that we're dealing in Hong Kong, and an area that I'm trying to be actively involved with, is the trading of when you trade, physical goods. I think everyone understands that. When you're talking about intellectual property, you're looking about trading of intangibles, things that you can't actually touch. And so one area I'm trying to pioneer in Hong Kong is the trading of internet intangibles. Again, licensed designs. But there are other aspects which, in terms of as you grow your internet in Thailand, that there's opportunities to innovate, which you would not first come to mind. For example, your accounting system. The United States was changing over to a new way of doing its accounts in July, and their GDP is going to go up by 3%, which is like the whole industrial output of Belgium, I think, something like that. And that was really because, again, how do you keep score, using that football analogy? How do you make sure there's a level playing field globally? And how do you keep track of the right things? Unfortunately, we don't know how to do really good accounting with intangibles. with these issues to do with copyright and patents. And so there is a system of, the UN developed something called a system of national accounts back in fact this is wrong, 2008, that shouldn't be 2009, which in fact the US is just deploying, and in Hong Kong we deployed it in September last year. So that gives you an idea that it took 3 years to push through an accounting change. But in terms of, for SMEs, if you're going to be developing your business and you spend all your time inventing stuff, you want to be able to know that it's valuable and that you can find investors to value that idea. Well, how do you do that? Well, there are different approaches. The UK has adopted an approach. They very quickly in 2010 recognized that as a developed economy, the use of the creative industries and in fact intellectual property was how they're going to drive their economy. I point to some excellent work by the UK Intellectual Property Office, the Ian Hargreaves Review, and in July this year they're going to develop something called the Copyright Hub. Again, a mechanism to legally license. Instead of you just copying it and not giving attribution or what have you, you have the opportunity to share in the UK via this Copyright Hub. But that, unfortunately, I think that's still UK domestic. The other aspect, which I think was the policy change, was looking at accounting and numbers to drive policy, not using traditional lobbyists or, in some sense, show me the economic data in which we can drive policy. But even that is being changed. Even that is being challenged. These aspects now to doing with 3D printers. If I license a 3D printer design from the United States, I ship that printed design over the internet to Hong Kong, and I print out that object in Hong Kong. How do you account for that? Is it tangible? Is that a tangible trade? Is it intangible trade? I have no idea. And so one of the things that we're trying to do in Hong Kong is raise this issue in terms of how do you change the terms of trade and how do you change the nature of trade through other institutions such as the Internet Governance Forum and other traditional institutions like the WTO. So in terms of today's workshop, in fact, the way I see it is in some sense this flows on to a second, what I call Act 2 later on this afternoon, looking at the ecosystem and finally bringing that all together in the plenary this afternoon. So I won't get into the themes, I'll break here, but these are the key words that I think you can do research on. So here is one of the things that the takeaways that you probably heard is, the ability to innovate without asking permission. We found that asking permission is very problematic in the internet because you don't know who's going to grant it. There wasn't an identity infrastructure. Well, there is now. Okay, Mozilla introduced Mozilla Persona. In other words, identity for the web. There was another problem, which is, well, how do I send money in the order of maybe 10 baht or less to someone who's got a great picture that I want to license in, somewhere in Latin America. There are now innovations in terms of the W3C, one of the groups, a web payments group. I also volunteer in that group. And again, this whole aspect's to do with permissions culture. I must have to ask permission from somebody before I am allowed to do something. That is what Creative Commons tries to do, but in terms of the Asia Pacific, that model is very strange. Surely I must have to ask somebody for permission to do something. Perhaps it's our education system, perhaps it's our culture, but if I don't have to ask anyone for anything, permission to do anything, then does that make me feel empowered, or does that make me feel that I'm at risk? And so that's a cultural change over time that I think one will have to think really hard about that it's actually going to be okay to innovate without asking for permission. Because in some sense, the reason why the internet has worked is that it has allowed open innovation without asking for permission. The other reason why it's successful is that it's open to everyone, the internet for everyone. So when we talk about my internet, we really do mean my internet. And there's a downside to that. It actually means you actually have to get up and participate in all the different open forums that were mentioned. If you have an interest, you don't have to participate in things you're not interested in. But the onus is on you to actually participate. It's not on your government, it's not on, because it's all open. The way that you want to shape your internet actively involves decisions that you make at the local level. So let's leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, ครับก็ สายเคเบิลอะไรต่างๆยังไงนะครับแล้วก็ต่อมาพินดานี่ก็พูดซึ่งจริงๆอันนี้เป็นเรื่องที่น่าสนใจมากครับก็คือผมคิดว่าเดี๋ยวขอย้ำอีกทีนึงคือพินดาในสไลด์มีคำว่า generative ใช่ไหมครับซึ่งคำนี้คือว่าเป็นคำที่เขาพูดถึงบ่อยมากนะครับในสไลด์ต่างๆเนี่ยคือถ้าจะให้ภาพที่พอนึกออกเนี่ยว่าไอ้ generative ความที่เรียกว่าอะไรนะอินเทอร์เน็ตมัน generative เนี่ยมันยังไงเนี่ยให้ผมอาจจะลองยกตัวอย่างเปรียบเทียบว่าถ้าเรามีเกมไหนที่มัน
The MC is summarize the panelists saying so I do not translate his summarizing. He explained and give his own example about a play-boarding game or something on internet, playing chess and playing. The game open for anyone, but they have to go for it since it's open for them.
Probably like you can มีคำถามอะไรสำหรับ
Any question at this point? The floor is yours. And I think Pinda has already answered. It seemed that not directly.
Let's answer the question before. A resource of perhaps a photograph from the internet, and you don't necessarily, if you can identify where that photograph came from, and you have to look at the licensing terms. You can't just technically you can do what you do, but again the whole point here is that sharing without permission. So in the traditional hard school legal sense, you don't have that permission unless it's been granted. And that applies to everything, even the photographs you take. You have all rights reserved. And so when we opened the internet, we found that we have all this legal glue that reduced the ability to share information, because some people actually wanted other people to share their photographs or what have you. In fact, we do that all the time on social media, for example. But technically, what you can do, and the finesse is actually to legally license that. And that's why Creative Commons for everything other than software was such an innovation. Is that you can say, look, I just share my work, but at all the licenses that happen, you have to give attribution. So, for example, if you downloaded my photograph of my pictures of what have you, then you'd have to say, well, this photograph was from Pinda Wong. So there's attribution. There are other terms such as, non-commercial, the ability to remix. What if you ask the digital generation now, creativity is measured in different fashions. It's not that you have to come up with an amazingly new idea all the time. You can mix other people's work in a new way. Other aspects that have been the aspects to do with copyright law that allow you to take a portion of a work for use. There are other aspects to do with for the purposes of satire, etc., etc. And that varies by jurisdiction. The complexity here is that no normal average person is going to have a education in copyright. And so what CC tries to do is make it easy enough using icons. Again, the fact that it's machine searchable. If you look at, for example, Flickr is a major website. You can search for, we can probably do that now, CC licensed photographs. So that you can legally license it and reuse it. The key area here is the big areas in open educational resources. So, for example, if there was a great textbook on maths, but some of the questions had to be translated into Thai, if the person granted you the right to make adaptations, you could do the translation. So, so YouTube has Creative Commons licenses. The benefit of this way of doing creativity is, I would highlight, Wikipedia. Okay, the chief business process innovation in terms of the internet was when you allow people to polish your work 24 hours a day anywhere in the world, you can take something that initially was maybe not 100% accurate, not very good, but if you get a large group of people and they contribute a little bit of their time or a little bit of the domain expertise, you can end up with something which is better than that has ever been invented before. And so that allowed, again, a very different way of developing products. Why is open legal licensing very important these days? Is because the cost, there's a tremendous, this is actually spilling into this afternoon, but there's a huge cost of complexity, right? When you're developing products and stuff like that. So global market, you've got suppliers, okay, like hard disk industry in Thailand, we found out that chain was kind of fragile after the floods, right? There's a whole cost of complexity. And to get around that, in terms of you looking at research labs, what we're finding right now is that not only at the individual corporate level, or at the university level, but also at the country level, it is now too expensive to do research by yourself. So that's why we talk about ecosystems. Right? If you look at before, maybe HP and IBM, maybe one of the few groups now that continue to have, can afford to have in-house research. Another way of doing it is, again, shaping the debate. IBM is a great supporter of open source software. How does that work? What's the commercial relationship? Because again, you get a better product out there, but more importantly is you get to shape opinion. So one of the currencies we look at now is not just money, it's opinion, because we're all very time poor. I can't even read all my emails in the day. So I go to, ask Tip, what's the latest situation in Thailand? And she will give me her opinion, and that insight is extremely valuable. So if you look at social media right now, and people are following and tweeting, so the nature of the game is changing. It's a different distribution of power, in a sense, away from so-called things like money. And sometimes you put money into the relationship, it contaminates the relationship, right? In terms of the marketplace for ideas. And to compete in the marketplace for ideas is very, very different. It's not necessarily on price. I can write software and I can release it as open source software, but no one wants to use it, or no one wants to develop it. So just because it's free and open, the way that it's free and open means, yes, you can free and adapt. You're also free to completely ignore it. And so this rate of innovation, it's not the fact that, more photographs were taken last year than I think in the whole of human history. So the rate at which we're producing information is so voluminous now that whatever the ability, as I said, everyone's got the microphone now and everyone's talking at the same time. The real question is, who's listening? How do you influence that debate? And so not only is commerce changing, but it's extremely disruptive. The size of organizations to compete in these days, the complexity of running a business, global business with maybe 8 staff, but it's changing. So all of these things provides, some people see that as a threat, others who see that as a tremendous opportunity. I personally see that as an opportunity. But don't forget, there is a cost. The cost is for those people who have old business models. Look at the cost of producing, a movie. Before that, only a few groups in the world could afford to produce a feature-length film, right? Nowadays, you've got a camera and video camera.
Probably, yeah, we can go over to the afternoon session. แต่ตะกี้ขอโทษนะครับขอเพิ่มเติมเมื่อกี้พูดถึงdisruptive technology.
I would like to correct my earlier what I would like to add about disruptive technology. I think for the disruptive technology, what Pinda explained to us is we got a new technology. It can make the old technology disrupt. So, for instance, right now, since we have the kind of the new model of the iTunes selling, it can brought about the disruptive technology for the CD or DVD printing.
Yes, please.
I would like to just say one thing that will help us lead into the panel this afternoon, and it's about development. And when we talk about my internet, there are people that don't have the internet. So the question is, how do you create the infrastructure and the market, and that's one thing we do well with colleagues around the world and with other internet technology partners. From APNIC in this region to ICANN and others, we partner with them to try and build some of this internet infrastructure. One of those things that we help build is called an internet exchange point. It's a very important piece of equipment, several pieces of equipment, but just think of it in the sense that it lets you keep local traffic local. You don't have to take your traffic over the border into another country to talk to each other. This is a very important thing because it's very expensive if you don't have an IXP in a certain region of the country, because it's expensive to get traffic probably from here, Bangkok, up to other parts of the country. So when you have an IXP in your city and in your region, you bring down the cost of connectivity. When you bring those costs down and you increase the quality of what you're seeing faster on the internet, as Pindar was saying, you begin to trust that information as coming in faster, easier to use, and you are then able to create, put business online, talk to your friends, do other things. So I just want to say that my internet is an important concept of how do we bring the internet to people. So this afternoon at 1:30, we'll be talking with a really great panel. Kanchana said, one of your very wise and important internet technologists in this country, Pindar, my colleague Raj, who's the Regional Bureau Director for Asia Pacific, and Tip's colleague as well here in the region, and Rohan Samanjiva, who was a former regulator in Sri Lanka. So we've got a good panel. I myself was a regulator and a policymaker, worked for a company like Pindar, AT&T. So we have a lot of collective information we're going to share with you about the importance of bringing the internet, sustaining it, developing it. It's something that your country is very focused on as well with the Thailand 2020. And we have a formula at the Internet Society called Smart Internet Development that we'll talk about more.
Just to be here, when this presentation hopefully will go on the internet, and the way I've licensed it under CC, you're welcome to translate it, remix it, do whatever you want with it, without having to ask me.
Well, actually, the fact that you come on to an Internet Society event means that already. It's a given. ก็คืองานนี้นะคะอะไรก็ได้ที่เป็น PowerPoint หรือเอกสารต่างๆที่มีชื่อ Internet Society
For this INET Bangkok 2013, for instance, we provide you all the presentations, the slides and everything. It will be under the CC, the Creative Commons, for instance, I can tell you. Yeah. And so let's get back to the Q&A. I will open the floor for all participants. You have a good chance. This is very great for you. Anybody heard about the Creative Commons? Raise your hand. First, in Thailand, we already have the Creative Commons Thailand, you know. Please raise your hand. Okay, we got few. Quite a few. So, why you know about Creative Commons? So I would like to know. Can you share with us, gentleman, the gentleman at the back?
A few of them have actually raised their hands. So I'm asking the young generation how come they know about the Creative Commons. ลูกเดินมาที่แสดงตัวตนหน่อยได้ไหมคะ
ก็คือตอนนั้นเป็น
I learned from my class in the university, and we use the Blender, the applications, and we locate for the Creative Commons resources that we can further work in our classroom setting. I'm from Kasesa University.
แล้วท่านอื่นเห็นพี่ผู้หญิงยกมือใช่ไหมคะพี่ค่ะขอทราบได้ไหมคะว่าทราบได้ยังไงคะเรื่อง Creative Commons
I got an opportunity to be trained one of the web development class. So I learned about this Creative Commons from the class. Another person there. Can you share with us your experience? Did you work with the Creative Commons Thailand? No, I didn't work with the group. I learned about the CC from my online community, from blogger and from other photographers, and we have the CC contents, and we learn how to share our contents properly, and so that's why we learn.
Yeah. Can I just go back to the reason why you actually want to use CC? Well, okay, you can search it and find it on the internet, but the legal protection, if you use the licenses correctly, is it gets rid of fear. The fear of uncertainty, the fear of being sued for using someone's work without permission. So within the blogger community, CC is almost, is again something like the de facto standard, because you don't lose your rights. In fact, you gain rights, because these are rights you already have under copyright. But if you CC and someone quotes your blog without your attribution, you have the right, in some sense, to sue them if that's the way you want to do it. So again.